Have you ever wondered how a small island nation off the coast of Europe grew to rule nearly a quarter of the world's land and people? England, a country smaller than many American states, once created the largest empire in human history. Its language became global. Its legal system shaped dozens of nations. Its industrial innovations transformed how humans live. But England wasn't always powerful. For much of its early history, it was invaded, conquered, and ruled by outsiders. This is the remarkable story of how England evolved from a remote tribal land to a global superpower, and how its unique blend of cultures created something entirely new. England's story begins long before written records. 11,000 years ago, England wasn't even an island. It was connected to Europe by a land bridge called Doggerland. As the massive ice sheets from the last ice age melted, sea levels rose dramatically, flooding this connection and permanently separating Britain from mainland. Europe around 6500 BC, the first humans in England, were hunter-gatherers who followed animal herds across vast grasslands. They left few traces beyond stone tools and occasional settlements. Around 4000 BC, a revolutionary change arrived: farming. People from the Middle East brought crops, livestock, and new ways of living. For the first time, humans could build permanent settlements rather than following migrating animals. These early farmers also began building massive monuments that still baffle us today. Stonehenge, with its precisely arranged massive stones, required incredible coordination and engineering skill. Some stones weighed over 25 tons and were transported from Wales 150 miles away. These monuments suggest complex religious beliefs and social organization far beyond what we once imagined for prehistoric people. As metalworking technology spread across Europe, the Stone Age gave way to the Bronze Age and later the Iron Age. Wave after wave of migrants brought new technologies, languages, and customs. By 500 BC, Celtic culture dominated England. These Celtic Britons lived in tribal kingdoms, built hill forts, created intricate metalwork, and practiced Druidic religion. For thousands of years, England developed in isolation from the great civilizations of the Mediterranean. But that was about to change dramatically when the world's greatest superpower set its sights on this distant island. In 55 BC, Julius Caesar led Roman forces across the English Channel. Having just conquered Gaul, Caesar hoped to add Britain to Rome's expanding empire. His first invasion was little more than a brief landing on the coast before retreating. He returned the following year with a larger force, but still failed to establish a permanent presence. Nearly a century passed before Emperor Claudius launched a proper invasion in 43 AD this time. Rome was determined to stay. 4 legions, around 20,000 professional soldiers, landed on England's shores. With their superior weapons, tactics, and organization, they gradually pushed inland. The native Britons didn't surrender easily. In 60 to 61 AD, Queen Boudicca of the Iceni tribe led a massive uprising after Roman officials flogged her and raped her daughters. Her rebels destroyed the Roman settlements at Colchester, London, and St. Albans, killing an estimated 70,000 Romans and their allies. Roman forces eventually defeated Boudicca's army in a decisive battle, but her rebellion showed the fierce resistance Romans faced. Despite occasional revolts, Rome firmly established control over England. They built a network of military roads connecting new towns like Londinium, Ebracum, and Aquae Sulis. To protect the northern frontier from unconquered Scottish tribes, Emperor Hadrian ordered the construction of a massive stone wall across northern Britain in 122 AD, parts of which still stand today. Roman rule transformed England. Latin became the language of government and education. Stone buildings replaced wooden structures. Public baths, forums, and amphitheaters appeared in towns. Christianity gradually spread, replacing native religions. Wealthy Romans built luxurious villas with heated floors and elaborate mosaics in the countryside. For nearly 4 centuries, England was part of the mightiest empire on earth. But Rome's power couldn't last forever. By the early 5th century, barbarian invasions threatened Rome's European territories. In 407 AD, Rome withdrew its legions from Britain to defend Italy. The Romano-British were left to fend for themselves, marking the end of Roman Britain and the beginning of a dark new era. With the Romans gone, England stood vulnerable. The Romano-British leaders, lacking Rome's military might, faced raids from Picts in the north and Irish from the west. According to the 6th century monk Gildas, they made a fateful decision to hire Germanic mercenaries to help defend their lands. These hired warriors came from northern Germany and Denmark, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. Rather than simply serving as defenders, they soon began conquering territory for themselves and encouraging more of their people to migrate to Britain. Whether this takeover happened through brutal conquest or gradual settlement remains debated by historians. What's clear is that over the next 2 centuries, these Germanic peoples became the dominant force in what is now England, pushing the native Britons westward into Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany in France. The Anglo-Saxons brought their language, their pagan religion, and their tribal political structures. By the 7th century, Anglo-Saxon England had organized into 7 main kingdoms known as the Heptarchy: Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Sussex, and Wessex. These kingdoms frequently fought each other for dominance in a constantly shifting balance of power. Christianity returned to England when Pope Gregory sent the missionary Augustine to Kent in 597 AD. In 793 AD, dragon-prowed ships appeared off the coast of Northumbria. These Norse raiders attacked the holy island of Lindisfarne, slaughtering monks and stealing sacred treasures. One Anglo-Saxon chronicler wrote, "Never before has such terror appeared in Britain." This raid marked the beginning of the Viking Age in England. For decades, Viking raids terrorized coastal communities. They targeted monasteries specifically, knowing these undefended sites contained valuable gold and silver objects. But in 865 AD, something changed dramatically. A massive force the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle called the Great Heathen Army landed in East Anglia. These Vikings weren't just raiders anymore. They wanted land to settle. Like a tidal wave, the Viking forces swept across England. Northumbria fell in 867 AD with the capture of York. East Anglia surrendered in 869 AD after its king, Edmund, was killed. Mercia collapsed in 874 Adellie, Wessex. The southernmost kingdom, led by King Alfred, stood in their path. By 878 AD, the situation looked hopeless. Alfred had been driven into hiding in the marshes of Somerset. England seemed destined to become completely Viking. But in a remarkable turnaround that spring, Alfred rallied his forces and defeated the Vikings at the Battle of Edington. This crucial victory saved Anglo-Saxon England from complete conquest and earned Alfred his title, the Great. Rather than trying to drive the Vikings out entirely, Alfred negotiated the Treaty of Wedmore, establishing the Danelaw, the eastern half of England where Vikings could settle under their own laws. While recognizing Alfred as overlord, this pragmatic approach allowed Anglo-Saxon and Viking cultures to gradually blend together. Alfred didn't just defeat the Vikings militarily. He strengthened Wessex in numerous ways. He built fortified towns called burhs across his kingdom. He reorganized the army. He established schools and translated important Latin texts into Old English, promoting literacy and learning. He even created a navy to counter Viking sea power. Alfred's descendants gradually reconquered the Danelaw. His son Edward the Elder and daughter Thelfuld pushed the boundaries of Wessex northward. His grandson Athelstan accomplished what no ruler had done before. He united all of England under one crown in 927 AD, becoming the first true king of the English. This unified England proved its strength at the Battle of Brunanburh in 937 AD, defeating a combined army of Scots and Viking invaders. For almost a century, England enjoyed relative stability. But by the late 10th century, Viking raids returned with renewed intensity. King Thellard, the Unready, tried buying peace by paying the Danegeld, a massive tax used to bribe the Vikings. This short-sighted policy failed. In 1013 AD, England was conquered by the Danish king Svein Forkbeard. For the next few decades, England's throne bounced between Anglo-Saxon and Danish rulers. From 1016 to 1035, the Danish king Canute ruled England as part of a North Sea empire that included Denmark and Norway. After Cnut's sons died without heirs, the Anglo-Saxon line was restored under Edward the Confessor. When Edward died childless in January 1066, England faced its greatest succession crisis, one that would bring about the most consequential year in English history. Over the next century, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms gradually converted, blending Christian practices with some of their older traditions. Monasteries became centers of learning, preserving knowledge through the so-called Dark Ages. The Venerable Bede, writing in Northumbria in the early 8th century, produced the first comprehensive history of the English people. By the late 8th century, the original 7 kingdoms had consolidated into 4 larger ones, with Mercia and Wessex emerging as the most powerful. A distinct Anglo-Saxon culture had developed, with its own art, literature, and political systems. England was beginning to form its own identity, but another wave of invaders was about to arrive that would transform the island yet again. The events of 1066 would transform England more profoundly than perhaps any other single year in its history. When Edward the Confessor died without an heir, 3 powerful men claimed England's throne. Harold Godwinson, the powerful Earl of Wessex, was elected king by the Anglo-Saxon nobles. Despite being Edward's brother-in-law, his claim had no royal blood behind it. Harald Hardrada, the fearsome king of Norway, believed the throne had been promised to his family during Cnut's reign. William, Duke of Normandy, claimed that Edward had promised him the throne years earlier. He also argued that Harold Godwinson had personally sworn to support his claim. The first challenger to arrive was Harald Hardrada, who landed in northern England with 300 ships in September. Harold Godwinson's army marched 190 miles north in just 4 days, an incredible feat, and completely surprised the Norwegian forces at the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September 25th. The Norwegian king was killed and their invasion crushed. But even as the victorious English celebrated, William of Normandy landed on the southern coast with nearly 7,000 men. Harold's exhausted army had to immediately march south to meet this new threat. On October 14, 1066, the Anglo-Saxon and Norman forces met at the Battle of Hastings. Harold's infantry formed a shield wall on high ground, while William's army included both infantry and cavalry. After hours of fighting, the English position collapsed. According to legend, Harold was killed by an arrow through his eye. The last Anglo-Saxon king was dead, and England's fate was sealed. William the Conqueror was crowned on Christmas Day 1066, beginning the most complete transformation of England since the Anglo-Saxon invasion. The entire Anglo-Saxon aristocracy was systematically replaced by Norman French nobles. Almost overnight, French became the language of the government, courts, and nobility, while common people continued speaking English. To solidify his control, William built castles across England, including the Tower of London. In 1086, he commissioned the Domesday Book, an unprecedented survey recording every piece of property, every person, and every animal in his kingdom. This detailed census showed the complete Norman takeover. Of the 180 barons listed, only 2 were English. The Norman Conquest permanently changed England. It tied the country to continental European politics for centuries. It created a unique linguistic divide that would eventually blend to form modern English. It introduced feudalism in its most developed form, and it began a new chapter in English history dominated by powerful monarchs with French connections. After William's death, another succession crisis led to civil war between Empress Matilda and Stephen of Blois. This period, known as the Anarchy, saw England torn apart by nearly 2 decades of conflict. When Stephen died in 1154, Matilda's son Henry II took the throne, founding the Plantagenet dynasty that would rule England for over 300 years. Henry II ruled not just England, but vast territories in France through inheritance and his marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine. At its height, This Angevin empire stretched from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees Mountains, making England's king more powerful than the French monarch. But this continental connection also entangled England in centuries of European conflicts. Henry's most famous conflict was with Thomas Becket, his friend whom he appointed Archbishop of Canterbury. When Becket opposed the king's attempts to control the church, their friendship turned to hatred. In 1170, four knights, believing they were acting on the king's wishes, murdered Becket in his own cathedral, an act that shocked all of Christendom. Becket became a martyr and saint, while Henry had to do public penance for his role in the affair. Henry's son, Richard the Lionheart, spent most of his 10-year reign away on crusade or fighting in France, viewing England mainly as a source of tax revenue. His brother John, who succeeded him, lost most of the French territories and faced rebellion at home. In 1215, angry barons forced King John to sign Magna Carta at Runnymede, a document limiting royal power and establishing that even the king was subject to the law. Though initially ignored by John, Magna Carta became the foundation of English constitutional law and would inspire democratic movements worldwide centuries later. Edward I strengthened royal government and conquered Wales, incorporating it into his kingdom. He attempted to do the same to Scotland, but faced fierce resistance from William, Wallace, and Robert the Bruce. Edward earned the title Hammer of the Scots, but never fully subdued them. His grandson Edward III began the 100 Years' War with France in 1337, claiming the French throne through his mother. English longbowmen won stunning victories at Crécy and Poitiers, but these successes didn't translate into lasting control of French territory. Then disaster struck. The Black Death arrived in 1348, killing between 1/3 and 1/2 of England's population. This demographic catastrophe transformed English society by creating a labor shortage that increased the value of peasant work and weakened the feudal system. When the government tried to cap wages and restrict worker movement with the Statute of Laborers, tensions grew. These tensions erupted in the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, led by Wat Tyler. Rebels from Kent and Essex marched on London, executing government officials and briefly taking control of the city. Though the revolt was suppressed and its leaders executed, it demonstrated the growing power of common people and marked the beginning of feudalism's long decline. The late 14th century saw the emergence of distinctly English culture and literature, exemplified by Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, written in Middle English rather than French or Latin. Parliament also developed into a more regular institution with both lords and commons. The 15th century brought more turmoil with the Wars of the Roses, a dynastic struggle between the houses of Lancaster and York, both branches of the Plantagenet family. This complex, multi-decade civil war reached its conclusion at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, when Henry Tudor defeated Richard III, the last Plantagenet king. Henry VII established the Tudor dynasty by marrying Elizabeth of York, symbolically uniting the red and white roses. His cautious rule restored stability and royal finances after decades of conflict, setting the stage for one of England's most famous eras. Few periods in English history are as captivating or consequential as the Tudor era. Under just 5 monarchs, England transformed from a medieval kingdom to an emerging modern nation-state and naval power. Henry VII secured his throne against various challengers and rebuilt the crown's wealth through careful financial management. He arranged for his son to marry Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess, creating an alliance with Europe's most powerful nation. When Henry VIII inherited the throne in 1509, he seemed the ideal Renaissance prince, athletic, educated, charming, and ambitious. But his 38-year reign would be defined by his desperate quest for a male heir and the religious upheaval it triggered. After nearly 2 decades of marriage to Catherine of Aragon produced only one surviving child, a daughter named Mary, Henry became convinced God was punishing him for marrying his brother's widow. He sought an annulment from Pope Clement VII. When the Pope refused, partly due to pressure from Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V, Henry took drastic action. Between 1532 and 1534, Henry broke England away from the Catholic Church. establishing the Church of England with himself as supreme head. This English Reformation wasn't primarily about Protestant theology, but about royal power. Henry dissolved all monasteries between 1536 and 1540, seizing their vast lands and wealth, and executed those who opposed his religious policies, including his former chancellor Sir Thomas More. Despite 6 marriages, Henry produced only 3 children who survived childhood: Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward. When Henry died in 1547, his 9-year-old son became Edward VI. During Edward's brief reign, England became more genuinely Protestant under the guidance of his advisors. When Edward died of tuberculosis at age 15, his Catholic half-sister Mary took the throne. Mary, I attempted to restore Catholicism, marrying Philip II of Spain and persecuting Protestants. About 280 religious dissenters were burned at the stake during her 5-year reign, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. Her death in 1558 brought her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth to power. Elizabeth I's 44-year reign is often called England's Golden Age. She stabilized the Church of England as a moderate Protestant church, the middle way between Catholicism and radical Protestantism. She was a master of political survival, carefully balancing factions at court and projecting an image of herself as married to her country, the Virgin Queen. Under Elizabeth, English sailors like Francis Drake, John Hawkins, and Walter Raleigh began exploring the world and challenging Spanish dominance. The first English colony in North America was established at Roanoke. William Shakespeare and other playwrights created immortal works of literature. The defining moment of Elizabeth's reign came in 1588, when Philip II of Spain sent his invincible armada to invade England and restore Catholicism. The smaller, faster English ships, aided by stormy weather, defeated the Spanish fleet, securing England's independence and establishing it as a rising naval power. Elizabeth never married, and when she died childless in 1603, the Tudor dynasty ended. The crown passed to her cousin, King James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, uniting the crowns of the two kingdoms and beginning the Stuart era. The Stuart period would test the very nature of England's government through civil war, regicide, republican experiment, and ultimately constitutional monarchy. James I ruled both England and Scotland, but they remained separate countries with separate parliaments. His reign faced challenges, including the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, when Catholic conspirators tried to blow up Parliament with the king inside it. During this period, England established its first permanent colonies in America and trading posts in India, small beginnings of what would become a global empire. James believed strongly in the divine right of kings, the idea that monarchs were appointed by God and answerable only to him. This increasingly clashed with Parliament's growing assertion of its own rights and powers. These tensions grew worse under his son, Charles I, who took the throne in 1625. Charles I repeatedly dissolved Parliament when it refused his demands for money. He ruled without Parliament from 1629 to 1640, raising funds through obscure legal mechanisms that angered many wealthy landowners. Religious conflicts intensified as many feared Charles's sympathy toward Catholicism, particularly after he married a Catholic French princess. By 1642, these tensions erupted in the civil war between royalists and parliamentarians. This wasn't merely a political struggle, but a conflict over the very nature of government, whether ultimate authority rested with the monarch or with representative institutions. After years of bloody conflict across England, Parliament's new model army, commanded by Sir Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell, emerged victorious. In an unprecedented act, King Charles I was tried for treason against his people and executed on January 30th, 1649, outside the banqueting house in Whitehall. For the first time in its history, England became a republic called the Commonwealth. Oliver Cromwell eventually became Lord Protector, ruling with arguably more power than the king he had helped overthrow. His Puritan government banned many forms of entertainment and crushed rebellions. In Ireland with brutal force that is remembered there to this day. When he died in 1658, the experimental Republican government collapsed, and in 1660, the monarchy was restored with Charles II, son of the executed king, taking the throne. The Restoration period under Charles II saw London devastated by both plague and fire. It also witnessed cultural renewal, with theaters reopening after the Puritan ban, and scientific advancement through the newly established Royal Society. Political parties began to take shape, with the Whigs and Tories representing different visions of government. When Charles II died in 1685, his openly Catholic brother James II took the throne, reviving religious tensions. James's attempts to promote Catholicism and his belief in absolute monarchy alarmed many. When his Catholic wife gave birth to a son in 1688, Protestant nobles invited James' daughter Mary and her Dutch husband William of Orange to replace him in what became known as the Glorious Revolution. William and Mary accepted the English Bill of Rights, limiting royal power and strengthening Parliament. This bloodless revolution established the principle that monarchs ruled with the consent of the people through Parliament, a crucial step toward constitutional monarchy. It also began a long period of religious tolerance for Protestant dissenters, though not for Catholics, who remained politically excluded for another century. Queen Anne, the last Stuart monarch, oversaw a momentous change. In 1707, the Acts of Union formally united the kingdoms of England and Scotland into Great Britain, with a single parliament in London. From this point forward, England's history became part of Britain's larger story. When Anne died childless in 1714, the crown passed to her German cousin, George of Hanover. The Hanoverian kings faced challenges from Jacobite rebellions in 1715 and 1745, when supporters of the exiled Stuart dynasty attempted to restore them to the throne. The final Jacobite rising ended with the Battle of Culloden in 1746, the last major battle fought on British soil. The 18th century saw Britain emerge as a global commercial and naval power. The Bank of England created financial stability. The East India Company expanded British influence in Asia. The Royal Navy grew to become the world's largest maritime force. Despite the loss of the American colonies in the War of Independence, Britain's empire continued to expand elsewhere, particularly in India. At home, the Industrial Revolution transformed the English economy and society. Beginning around 1760, new manufacturing processes, powered first by water and then by steam, created unprecedented economic growth. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Leeds grew rapidly as factories replaced home-based production. England became the world's first industrial nation, the workshop of the world. This transformation brought both prosperity and problems. The new factory system created great wealth, but also harsh working conditions, child labor, urban slums, and pollution. Reform movements emerged to address these issues, gradually improving conditions through legislation like the Factory Acts. During the long reign of Queen Victoria, Britain reached the height of its global power. By the late 19th century, the British Empire covered nearly a quarter of the Earth's land surface and ruled over 400 million people. The saying that the sun never sets on the British Empire was literally true. It spanned so many time zones that some part was always in daylight. London became the world's largest city and financial center. British innovations in science, engineering, medicine, and transportation shaped the modern world. The railway network revolutionized domestic travel. While British steamships connected the empire globally, the electric telegraph created instant communication across vast distances. Victorian England also faced significant social challenges. The Irish potato famine of the 1840s caused mass starvation and emigration. The Chartist movement demanded democratic reforms. Religious revivals and moral campaigns sought to address social problems, from alcoholism to prostitution. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution challenged traditional religious beliefs. Despite these challenges, the Victorian era ended with Britain seemingly at the peak of its power. Few could have predicted how drastically the next century would change England's position in the world. The 20th century brought unprecedented challenges that transformed England's place in the world. The First World War cost over 700,000 British lives and marked the beginning of the empire's decline. The financial strain of the war, coupled with the rise of nationalist movements in the colonies, began to weaken Britain's global position. The interwar period saw significant social change. Women over 30 gained the right to vote in 1980. The Labour Party emerged as a major political force, forming its first government in 1924. The General Strike of 1926 highlighted ongoing class tensions. Then came the Second World War. Though ultimately victorious alongside its allies, Britain emerged financially exhausted. Under Prime Minister Clement Attlee, the post-war Labour government created the National Health Service and the modern welfare state, nationalizing major industries and utilities. The dissolution of the British Empire accelerated after the war. India gained independence in 1947, and most other colonies followed in the 1950s and 1960s. The Suez Crisis of 1956 demonstrated that Britain was no longer a superpower capable of acting independently of the United States. At home, English society underwent dramatic changes. Immigration from former colonies, particularly the Caribbean and South Asia, created a more multicultural society but also sparked racial tensions. Traditional industries like coal mining, shipbuilding, and textiles declined, causing economic hardship in many regions. Under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, Britain underwent a radical economic transformation. State-owned industries were privatized, trade union power reduced, and market forces emphasized. These policies revitalized some sectors of the economy but deepened regional inequalities between the prosperous Southeast and the former industrial heartlands. In 1973, Britain joined the European Economic Community, tying its economy closer to Europe. This membership became increasingly controversial, ultimately leading to the Brexit referendum in 2016, where a narrow majority voted to leave the EU, a process completed in 2020. Today, England is one of 4 nations that make up the United Kingdom, alongside Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. With over 56 million people, England comprises about 84% of the UK's population. While no longer a global superpower, England's influence continues through its language, its cultural exports, its financial services industry centered in London, and its educational and scientific achievements. England's journey from prehistoric settlements to global power and beyond represents one of history's most remarkable national stories. Few countries have experienced such dramatic transformations while maintaining a continuous sense of identity. What makes England's history particularly fascinating is its layered complexity. Each wave of newcomers, Romans, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, Normans, added new elements rather than completely replacing what came before. The English language perfectly exemplifies this. Its basic structure comes from Anglo-Saxon, but nearly 60% of its vocabulary derives from French and Latin sources. England's political development has been equally remarkable. From absolute monarchy to constitutional government, from feudalism to democracy, England pioneered governmental forms that would spread worldwide. Magna Carta, Parliament, the Bill of Rights. These English innovations became foundations of democratic systems across the globe. Throughout its history, England has shown an extraordinary ability to absorb change while maintaining continuity. Roman roads became medieval highways. Medieval castles became tourist attractions. Victorian factories became shopping centers. This blend of innovation and tradition, revolution and evolution, defines the English character. England's global influence far exceeded what might be expected from its modest size. Through exploration, trade, colonization, and cultural exchange, this small nation shaped the modern world in countless ways, from legal systems and parliamentary government to industrial methods and sporting traditions. The story of England reminds us that national identities are never fixed or pure, but constantly evolving through interaction with others. Today's England continues to change and adapt, shaped by new challenges and new arrivals, just as it has been for thousands of years. Its history is not simply a tale of kings and battles, but of a people who, through centuries of invasion, adaptation, and innovation created a unique culture that continues to influence our world today. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and share it. For more fascinating historical insights and future updates, don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends.